So thanks for joining us. I'm Bev Atfield. I'm the Principal of Workplace Science at Jostle. We are a tech company based in Vancouver, and our product is an employee intranet. And we're trying to help leaders connect people to everything that matters to them in their workday. And even though we're a tech company, we are thinking about, what's actually going on in the world of work and how are leaders feeling supported out there as they go about their business. And so as much as we hope our technology will help leaders be more connected in their organizations, we also have conversations like the one we're having today in this event, as well as on things like our podcast and writing on our blog, about all sorts of workplace topics like culture, leadership, teamwork, remote work, and everything in between, because we really feel it's important that we understand what's happening and contribute to the body of knowledge through this knowledge community. So thanks for joining us here today. I'm really delighted to be kicking off our next season of Conversations at Work. We are focusing on leadership over the next 6 months. So every month for the next 6 months, we'll be having a leadership themed conversation like the one we're going to have today. And as always, we are joined by a few guests who help me lead the conversation with participation from everyone who attends the event. So I do encourage you to get involved today, even though Ebony and Gil and myself are going to be leading the conversation. So love to introduce you to our guests, Ebony Smith and Gil Cohen. Ebony Smith has a company called Ebenum Equation, and Ebony is particularly interested in VUCA environments. So those environments which are complex, they're volatile, ever-changing, and as we know, this past year has basically made every single environment a VUCA environment. So Ebony does look at the macro side of things, and she coaches and counsels her customers around how to be more resilient leaders in the face of uncertainty. Gil, on the other hand, he focuses more at the individual employee level and helping leaders understand what's going on in workplaces so that they can create incredible experiences for each and every one of their employees. So I'm really looking forward to the very different perspectives that Ebony and Gil are going to bring today from the macro and micro perspectives. So looking forward to jumping in there. But before we do that, let's do something just to kind of get our creative juices flowing and sort of relax into the session that we're going to have here. So does everyone have a piece of paper and a pen handy? If you don't, just maybe grab that. And what I'm going to ask you to do is draw something that expresses how you feel about leadership today. So it could either be your own leadership style, it could be something you've observed about a leader, maybe leadership in general. So just something, a symbol, a picture, whatever you like. In the next, we'll take 3 minutes to do this. Just draw something, and there's no prizes for outstanding artistic abilities. Just draw something that expresses how you feel about leadership right now. Gil, are you a quick drawer? Are you already done?
I'm a very simple drawer, smiley faces, stick figures. So I got straight to it. I knew exactly what I was doing, exceedingly simple. And so, yeah, I'm done.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing it. Okay. All right, so I'll go first. So I have a fairly optimistic view of things right now. So for me, I feel like it's the heart is at the center of leadership for me right now. So that's my very quick and easy, maybe similar to Gil's line drawing. So over to you, Gil. What have you got for us?
So what I've drawn here is a smiley face that's half smiling, half frowning, and sort of the middle in between. Because in terms of leadership, it's really inconsistent. I mean, there are some incredible leaders out there, and you hear a lot of wonderful stories if you pay attention on LinkedIn or somewhere. But then there's also a lot of terrible stories that may not show up in non-anonymous sort of social feed. So that's why I spoke to the inconsistency in what is leadership today. It ranges.
Awesome. Anyone willing to volunteer to show what they drew? Anyone brave enough?
Well, mine is just, it's very detailed. I'm going to take the plunge here. a lot of what has happened in the last year. There's been a lot of different things, trying to understand situations and where people are coming from. So I drew stick figures, and there's one person who is the leader, and they're trying to figure out, should I listen? Should I try to understand? Should I try to solve? And just different bullet points that are probably going through their head. So a little bit scattered.
Yep, no, I get
No
that.
clouds.
Yep, that's a good thing. No rain clouds though, no tornadoes, nothing too upsetting on the sort of exterior there.
Right.
And on a similar road with Eva. So I have a person here. Oh. And it's like a general direction, and you can go so many directions with the brain, the heart, community, and problem solving, which is the math there. So I think leadership, you can go in several directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll take one more. Ebony, do you want to show us what you've got, and then we'll segue into what this has to do with the rest of our conversation.
Sure, mine is.
Oh, colors, next level.
I have a whole set of markers. I ask people to mind map all the time in session, and I do it with them. And so mine is, a lot of people are mining for new leadership skills, right? And mining for more resilience. And so that's just a pick with a mountain, and there's diamonds, but you have to get to it. And so part of that is doing the work. And so that was what popped in my mind. People are mining for new leadership.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, that was just a way for us to sort of step into our creative side. We're going to have this conversation today about the new face of leadership amidst the changing and uncertain landscape of workplaces. As we know, so many things have changed over the past year. Leadership was already starting to evolve, but we've been given a very firm nudge in terms of what leaders really need to be thinking about now. So much has changed around what employees expect of their workplaces and their leaders now. And we've seen so many different displays of leadership in the public space over this past year as well, that it's hard for us not to sit up and pay attention and understand, well, what are the challenges that we faced, and what shifts have happened, and how do we now move forward as leaders? So when everyone registered for the session today, we asked the question, what was the biggest leadership challenge for you in the past year? And there was some consistency around things like maintaining workplace culture, having work-life balance, keeping connected to people. So those challenges are really real and ongoing for all of us, I believe, regardless of whether you are still a remote worker, whether you've now moved into some sort of hybrid environment, or whether you've actually gone back to your office, or maybe you never left your workplace through the pandemic. So let's start off with just talking a little bit about those leadership challenges that we have experienced in the past year. And Gil and Ebony, I'd like to ask you to perhaps share with us each, in just a minute here, each, what was your biggest leadership challenge in this past year? So Ebony, maybe I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. I think for me, it was around finding trusted clarity filters. One of the first things that when the world began to shut down was there's so much polarization, and we'll talk about this later on, me finding trusted clarity filters to help me navigate my own life, right? So first it was about how do I secure my own Maslow's pyramid and stock up on as much dried beans and rice as I could, not knowing how long we were going to be shut down, and then figuring out whose voice did I trust that was sharing information so that I can make decisions about how to be healthy and well, and also mentally well, while we went through the first pandemic of my lifetime. And so what it would take. And so for me, it was around the trusted clarity filters, and then also tapping into my own mental resilience. And I realized I had to get dressed every day, which is why I'm dressed up. It shifted when I stopped wearing sweats. And I'm still working. And so I put on clothes like I'm in the office. I have a full set of clothes on. Not every day, but most days. I look camera ready, like if I was in my office. And those were the things that I had to work out, like finding a path for me. It's not everybody's path, but I needed that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can completely relate to the getting dressed side of things. Although I must say today I am in sweats on the bottom and dressed up on the top. So full disclosure, because it's cold in Vancouver today. Gil, how about you?
Yeah, no, I haven't worn anything but sweats for the last 11 months. So that's key. But no, for me, I appreciate Ebony's point about that filter, about understanding that there is a lot of information out there and determining which of it's actually relevant to me, which of it actually I should be internalizing, and which of it is actually noise. But the biggest thing for me, because I just had started my business 2 months before the pandemic hit, and I had to completely change course as a result of that. For me, it's been about discipline of focus. That's been the most difficult sort of self-leadership that I've had to deal with, is in terms of understanding, you know, I only have so many hours and so much energy, in making sure that where I'm focused is actually going in the right direction, especially in the uncertainty of March, April, May. I had struggles with that myself. And so then finding that focus, finding the right things to be, you know, putting my energy into, was probably the biggest struggle / opportunity / growing experience over the last year.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, please jump in, Ebony.
I had one point, Gil, I had to put on pants because I was gaining weight. I was a lot of, and I was like, what we can't do is do a new wardrobe at the end of this. And so because I had gained during the first 2 months of quarantine, probably like 7 or 8 pounds, I'm sure lots of people did, I was baking to comfort myself, and carbs equal comfort. I had to start getting dressed was to make sure that these clothes fit at the end of the period, so I didn't need a new wardrobe. Sweatpants are deceiving. That's the real reason. It's a little bit of vanity, but also a little bit of cheapness.
You know what? The system, you found a system that works for you. That's what really matters. You found a system that works for you. I've checked it a couple of times. My jeans still fit, my pants still fit. So I haven't needed to quite change yet, but I can appreciate where you're coming from on that. And I also, on that note, I know a lot of people who feel the need to dress up when they're working from home, where if they don't, they just can't get into it. It's a uniform, for lack of better terms, because it's a ritual that gets us into the moment. And that's something that I find interesting, because for a lot of us who have been working from home since March, is that the kind of the differentiation between work from home can be difficult. Well, I've been working on this couch all day, and now I'm going to sit and watch TV on the same couch. How do I differentiate? So that's also another way that I've seen people kind of get themselves into the mindset of both work and home, because that's another thing you were talking about, resilience, before. And I mean, so important, so valuable. Part of that is also being able to have downtime. Part of that is being able to have the rest and recovery from working all day. And it's hard to do that when you're wearing the same outfit on the same place that you've been sitting the whole day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just some real life challenges that we've all as leaders have had to adapt to. And, you know, I think some of the pictures that we saw really link into the way we feel now is the result of some of the challenges that we've had, right? So whether they're work-life balance issues or resilience issues or keeping your team connected issues, you know, there's a lot that's going on for us that has caused us to be where we find ourselves today. So is there anyone else in the meeting here this morning that would be willing to share, you know, what's a challenge been for you this past year that you wouldn't mind sharing, that maybe Ebony and Gil haven't already touched on? Just feel free to unmute and jump in if you're willing to do that. It's great for us to hear other voices during this call as well.
I can share.
Hi, Jen. Thank you.
Hi. I work for an organization that has a dispersed workforce. So 50% of us are, I've always worn pants. So 50% of us work from home, like we're used to this world. And then 50% of us were being sent home from an office. And so there are parts of that were, it was a great equalizer, so that our meetings and our sessions and our professional development and our opportunities really evened out, which is you know, a silver lining. But the balance of the folks that are starting to work from home that are having such a hard time, you know, how do you work from home? How is it, you know, I can't get anything done. It kind of hurts those folks that were remote. Like, well, you know, I've always worked, and like trying to figure out how to meet those two perspectives more kind of together.
Yeah, that's a really good point, just around, you know, the equality and the equity of how we allow employees to thrive, right? And suddenly now we have this spotlight being shone on all sorts of different kinds of employees that have different kinds of stressors and, you know, disadvantages, or you know, they're not included as much as others are, or whatever the case may be. So I think that has been really hard for us as leaders to treat people fairly. You know, I think it's been a requirement in the past, but I think this past year it became more pressing and more in front of us in terms of where the differences really were for people. Thanks for sharing that, Jen. Is one more person willing to jump in to give us their thoughts on a challenge they've come through? Kaylee, I saw you unmuted just a little while ago. Maybe you were willing to jump in.
Yeah, I have a couple, but you know, from my own perspective, and then from I think what I'm hearing from clients as well. And I like that idea about what's equal or what's fair. You know, those are two different concepts, but you know, we're seeing this shift with people working remote over the last year. A lot of people have changed their lives. They've moved away. You know, they moved away from their workplace, maybe to outside of commuting distance now. And you know, there's now on the horizon recalls to the office, maybe in a hybrid model or a blended situation, and people have moved away. And so, you know, I think there's going to, I don't know if anyone here has that solution, but you know, what our business is going to do about that. Are they going to mandate people either come back or quit, or are they going to take more of an approach of you know, not one size fits all, and you know, do what you want, and that comes with its own challenges, right? So I don't have the answer. It's just something that, you know, it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great way for us to shift into our next area of focus for the conversation, is just around, you know, the tremendous macro and micro shifts that have happened. You know, remote work and all sorts of different types of working structures now have arisen over this past year, and they're going to pose all sorts of issues for us as leaders, right? So thanks, Kaylee, for sharing that. Ebony, let's switch into the part of the conversation around more of the macro shifts that I know you are keeping a very, very close eye on and have your finger on the pulse. Do you want to talk us through maybe 3 of the key shifts that you're seeing that are happening at the sort of macro, so organization-wide, or even as, you know, societal shifts that are happening that are putting pressure on leaders right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the audience reference, a lot of this work is from a think tank in Silicon Valley called the Institute for the Future. And so wanted to give you that reference. If anything sparks your interest, you can go and dig for more. Specifically, this is the work of a gentleman named Bob Johansen, who does research on, he's a futurist, and he looks at foresight to figure out what are the signals that the current world is showing us that we need to prepare for in the future. And one of the things that in 2012, the Institute said that people needed for 2020, because they predicted we'd be under a global pandemic, we'd have a global climate change event, and then we'd also be under constant cybersecurity threat. We're around, there's 10 skills, but I'm gonna go into 3. And one of the first ones is smart mob organizing. It's the ability to create and engage and nurture purposeful business over an electronic platform for the common good of the organization. So some companies do this well, but this is a leadership skill everyone should have been cultivating or will need to cultivate. And the way we see this kind of playing out in society, I'm American, I'm going to give you a few American examples, so my apologies. But if we think about with the presidential rallies when they first happened for Donald Trump, the TikTokers went in and snatched up a whole bunch of the tickets. They smart mobbed, organized around that one event. It happened, those kind of things are happening simultaneously as different events are happening in world history. People are figuring out how to get together. We saw it also in the most recent news with the chat boards on the Reddit subchannels and also on Discord around buying GameStop stock and going against the Big Short, right? So people are getting better at organizing information and getting like-minded people to show up for them. Leaders will have to harness this societal trend to ensure that they keep in step with the generational attitudes that are happening. So how do you organize smart mobs inside your company to ensure that they're moving towards the company's purpose? If you thought about it, you could probably come up with 10 ways that technology has helped organize people without it being in mainstream media or coming from a leading voice where it was just a groundswell and then all of a sudden, boom, they went against the Big Short on GameStop, right? And then it made it into mainstream news, but it was already a thing by the time it happened. I worked on the trading floor for many years, and we always say, buy the rumors, sell the news. Once it makes it to the news, then you're probably behind the 8 ball already. One of the other skills is figuring out, and I mentioned this earlier, what are your trusted clarity filters? In the age of polarization, how do you find a trusted clarity filter that will help you and your team figure out the best decisions to make for your organization? In the world of polarized views, mistrust, AI, cyber threats, what's your trusted clarity filter? And I think clarity is different than certainty. Clarity is very flexible and it has the end goal in mind versus certainty is very brittle in how it's executed. And so figuring out what are the trusted clarity filters for your organization. And then the last one is depolarization. How do you depolarize people that are opposite ends of views, perspectives, points of view, stands, boiling points in life so that you get the common goal of the community or organization moving forward at the same cadence? Because what we all experienced was really a disruption in cadence to our lives, and we all had to figure out what that new rhythm was. But part of depolarization is ensuring that your teams stay in the same cadence so that you can meet the organizational challenges. So those are 3 that I think are super interesting that we should all be looking at moving forward.
Ebony, can I ask you a question about the depolarization?
Sure.
Because it has me thinking, right, about the difficulty, and I mean, you look especially in America in how divided society is. And we have a lot of people talking, and I believe this, you know, at least conceptually, that we should be bringing our whole selves to work and we should be bringing our authentic selves to work.
Yes.
But what happens when the authentic person that you're dealing with has a completely polar opposite view or they're authentically racist, right? How do you then, as a leader, depolarize that situation when you have 2 people who are at such odds against each other, or you as a leader are at such odds with one of your team members?
So I would say that we probably all have more in common as human beings than we have differences. And so there are a lot of things that are above the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot of things below the tip of the iceberg. And I think part of leadership is figuring out where the community lies. While you may be depolarized on 3 to 10 issues, there's probably 100 where you are polarized, where you're on the same side of it. So lead with commonality and then figure out how do you diffuse the differences through skills around having difficult conversations. But we have a lot more in common than we give ourselves credit for. A lot of times we all want the same common goal. The problem is the approach that we use to get to that goal. So if we all want a strong economy, you may say, don't shut down the economy during the pandemic because that's how it's going to stay strong. And I'm saying, look, let's shut down for 6 weeks and then we'll open up with no mask, right? And so we both have the same common goal, but our approach is polarized in how we would go to achieve that goal. And I think there's a lot more things that we can figure out on, you know, how to have conversation. I think also great public discourse somehow is a lost skill. Like we don't know how to sit down at a table, disagree, figure out how we will sharpen each other, and then come up with a viable solution that works for everybody's, for the common goal that we have in place. So yeah, I thank you for that, Gil. But yeah, that's one of the things I think we forget we have a lot more in common than we do not. And racism is real. And it is something, sometimes people will say, but I have a friend that's this. And so I'm not really a racist, but the views that you espouse when you're talking about a general group are racist, but you may make exceptions for people that you have personal connections with. And I think getting them to see that point of view also becomes very part of the journey. The new skill for 2030 is figuring out how to do full spectrum thinking. The skills that I mentioned were ones we needed for 2020. The skills we need for 2030 are really around full spectrum thinking. How do you de-label people so they can show up as their authentic selves, like you were talking about, Gil? That's really the challenge for organizations going into 2030. And that's what the research that's been released this year for the set of skills, and this is before the pandemic, all of it was written and then it got released. These are the skills that organizations need to be growing their pipelines towards. And one of the first ones is around full spectrum thinking. How do you decategorize people so that they can show up as their full selves? Which I know that's right into you, Gil, about what you do.
Amazing answer. Thank you so much. That was really enlightening. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so Ebony, what I'm hearing from what you just shared was, it seems like there are these things that have changed for us in society at large that are now suddenly things that leaders need to be paying attention to because the boundaries have sort of been removed, right? And I wonder, do you think that has been escalating over the past few years, or did that get accelerated just in the past year? Because some of the things you were talking about, you know, like the smart mob organizing and using technology, like those are things that people maybe are using in their social lives, but maybe not in the workplace. So is that blurring going to happen more quickly, do you think, for us as leaders to be able to harness some of those things, to use them within the workplace and not just outside of work?
I think it does, and I think it speaks to social responsibility. One of the things that we see a lot more often is around what's your social contract to your employees, but then also to your customers and the society in which you operate. And so a lot more people are being called on the carpet for things maybe their leadership has said, things, places where their company chooses to donate their money. Is that for the societal good? And so I think the blurring of the lines comes into place when people don't trust some of the structures that historically framed out society, and they're putting more social responsibility on the large organizations that benefit from the societal, from society spending their resources with them. So if I'm going to give you my money, I also expect you to act in a certain way that benefits us as our total collective. And I think that's part of the blurring of the smart mob organizing. And it also is part of cancel culture, right? So all of those things are kind of coming to a convergence. And for a lot of corporations, they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're having this conversation, please, anyone in the audience, feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, put your hand up. We'll definitely take your comments or your contributions as you're willing to share them. So please don't feel like you need to feel talked at today. This is about talking together and just putting these topics on the table. So Gil, maybe let's come at this from a different perspective, and your sort of level that you work at is really at the individual level within an organization. So your customers and the people that you're advising are feeling the effects of the things that Ebony has just shared with us. So what's going on for you, do you think, in terms of the employee experience side of things, and what are you seeing in terms of shifts towards a more human-centric workplace?
So one of the things that's happened as a result of the shift as a result of the pandemic has been there's a forced humanization of the workplace. Because if it's a group that's been forced into remote work, well, now instead of only seeing you at an office in your role as whatever it is your role, now I see you as a person who has this bookshelf behind you. You have these 2 dogs. I know you have kids, whatever it is. One of the funnier actually LinkedIn posts I saw at the beginning of the pandemic was a person complaining about how they couldn't hate certain people anymore because now instead of being that pain from accounting, they're that pain from accounting who reads these books, who knows these things, and it humanized them. And it's a joke, but it's also, representative of the fact that all of a sudden we have to kind of reckon with the fact that it's a human being on the other end. It's not a human resource. It's a human being, and no matter where they are, they're still a human being. This is elevated not just in the remote work, but also in essential workers, because whereas previously health and safety was really not a major concern for most organizations, maybe, you know, slippage, materials, et cetera. Now health and safety was part and parcel of everything that needed to be done, which really humanized everybody. Because instead of just looking at them as, hey, A to B, get the job done, now you're, you know, by being at the office, you're risking your health. Heck, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who, she and her partner both had COVID because her partner, a white collar worker, was forced to go into the office based on the systems of their work. And every single person now in their partner who works for that company has now had COVID. So that company obviously didn't care about the humanized aspect of it. They ignored the humanized aspect of it at their own and their team's peril. And so that's, I think, one of the big changes is the humanization of, you're not just a, you know, you're not just doing accounting on the other end. You're living your life. You've got to adjust. You know, some people aren't able to work the normal 9 to 5 because they've got kids that they've got to take care of at home to help along with school, right? And some people are wanting to work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day because they have nothing else and they have no one else, and they're stressed for those reasons. And so the humanization, and then as part of that, especially over the last 10, 11 months, is the mental health aspect. The reality is it's very difficult and almost an anomaly to not have any sort of mental health implications since the pandemic started in one way or another. Most of us have been hit in one way or another. And one of the things that I think often gets forgotten when we talk about organizations and we talk about leadership is that this happens to leaders too. It's not just that frontline staff are feeling the stress, it's also that leaders are. They're having these mental health up and downs. Many of them are social people, extroverts that are desperate to get back into the office with other people and are suffering as a result of it, but are still expected to come day in, day out and be responsible for other people.
Yeah, I think, Gil, that reminds me of, you know, when you watch the safety video on an airplane, right? They tell you to put your own mask on first, right? And then help other people. And that's, you know, very similar to the situation that leaders are in today, where you've got to look after yourself first, because you're really no good to anyone else if you cannot function fully. Or and also just admit that you're struggling to breathe and you need to put the mask on, right? That's like that's the other key part, I think, that has really shifted for me as I've watched the leadership landscape change here, is this: it's okay for leaders to be vulnerable and to be human themselves in ways that have never been accepted before. And I celebrate that. I think that's a wonderful shift that's happened. So what else have you seen, Gil, just in terms of the impacts that this has had on things like psychological safety for people at work? So how are leaders creating safe spaces for people not only to be themselves, but to continue taking risks, continue being vulnerable and being, you know, able to make mistakes and fail in these new kinds of environments that we're working in now?
From the experiences and the conversations I've had, they're not much better at it than they were 11 months ago, but they're more aware of the problem. That because it's a skill to, and it's an undertaking to build psychological safety. So if they are in a situation, not like the world started in March of 2020. So if they're in a situation where they had destroyed that psychological safety up to that point, first of all, most likely moving forward, that wasn't the first concern in their head. But even if they have had this shift, well, the damage has been done. It's really hard to berate people, to belittle people, to fire somebody for questioning you, and then later on expecting your employees to just say, oh, no, it's okay, you can talk to me about these things. You know, a lot of managers say they have an open door policy, but what does that really mean? What does that really mean with a lot of them? And unfortunately, They may say the right things. They may be intending to do the right things, but their behaviors don't always come out that way. And then speaking to your point of needing to put the oxygen mask on themselves first, well, if they haven't, they're not necessarily going to be aware of the problems elsewhere. So if they're so pent up in their own stress, in their own anxiety, in their own uncertainty about what is moving forward in their role, they're then going to pass that on to their teams. So it needs to start with that and understanding their own role, their own responsibility. So I know it's not the most positive thing I'm saying, because it hasn't changed as much as one would like, but it starts with an awareness, because people have been talking about psychological safety, and rightfully so, for years. But it's only within a certain amount of time where people are starting to actually recognize, you know what, this actually makes a difference. When the leader speaks first in a meeting and everybody else just goes in behind them, and then the leader wonders, why aren't we innovating? Well, there's a reason for that, because people didn't feel safe to say something different, to go outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gil. Eva and Kaylee, I noticed that you had unmuted. Did either of you want to jump in with some thoughts at this point?
I have a question, Gil. You know, when it comes to psychological safety, or when it comes to putting your mask on before you can help others, you know, for those leaders, leadership is a very lonely, it can be a very lonely space, right? So for those leaders who are, say, at the top, right? They're at the very top, and you always say, you know, stuff rolls downhill, so you don't vent down, right? But when you're at the top, you can't vent up. You need to come with solutions, not problems. So for those people, like, what do you suggest for those people? Who did they talk to? Like, what is the best outlet to help those individuals get out of their own heads? Or, you know, I know we talk about exercise and we talk about, you know, but are there any, do you have any advice for that?
So are you talking about the C-suite in general, or specific for CEOs?
Yeah, the C-suite in general. Right.
C-suite
So
in general.
those senior leaders that are expected to be able to run the world. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great question, because that's something that is very lonely. And really the issue is that it comes down to what's the system within the organization. Because if the system is such that senior leaders are at odds or are seen as rivals, then you're not going to be comfortable talking to each other as peers and asking each other for support. If the system is created that, hey, we're all on the same team moving in the same direction, then that creates that support, and that's the opportunity. If that's not there, if people are, you know, fighting for resources, fighting for attention, then you're not going to go to the person who is against you, is fighting against you, for support. And it's very difficult to be vulnerable. That's part of the loneliness of leadership, is that we've been taught for so many years that the leaders, they never have a bad day. They can't be vulnerable. They can't be their authentic human selves. And that is something, obviously, that needs to change, but it needs to be done in the right system. We can't just tell, you know, a CTO, hey, start talking to your peers, because if they're in an environment where the CFO doesn't trust them and the CHRO, you know, is vying for the CEO job, they're not going to have that psychological safety at that level. So that's something that's also important, that is, the CEO is a manager, they have their team, they need to create that psychological safety and encourage their team members to support each other. And the interesting thing about it is that then it builds from there. Because once you understand each other as a human and understand, you know, exactly like Ebony said, we have more in common than we have going against each other. The next time you have a business conversation, the next time you're at odds, it becomes a lot easier to have that conversation, a lot easier to trust that that person has the company's best interests in mind and not just their own best interest in mind. When it comes to the CEO, that's a different story, because it is extremely lonely at the top, and there are a lot of great CEO peer groups out there who can help each other. But when it comes to senior leaders, in the ideal situation, they're each other's support system.
Thanks, Gil. Ebony, I'll pass it over to you. You had a comment for Gil that you'd like to share or ask of Gil.
Yeah, Gil, I wanted to know, so if I'm at the awareness stage regarding psychological safety and I know I need to build it, what are ways I could nurture it for myself? And I'm asking this for all the listeners because I think that would be important. Like, I know I'm not psychologically safe and I'm also under surge capacity. As an employee, what are some things I could do to begin to build that for myself? Because maybe my company doesn't offer anything.
So as an employee, to be honest with you, it is very difficult to affect that change because the systems are beyond your control mostly of creating that. And it really comes down from my experience around being able to effectively set boundaries. Being able to effectively say yes or no, I won't accept this kind of situation, because psychological safety is lost on events, from things that happen. We know, okay, I am not safe. Well, when those events happen, what is your response? Is your response to just accept it, say, okay, this is how it is, I'm not going to talk anymore? Or is it, you know what, I was saying something, I have an opinion, it deserves to be respected. And so being strong and self-confident, not easy, especially in a work situation when you have a lot of your wellness on the line. But by setting the tone with the way people treat you, you'll set yourself up for the best chance to have psychological safety. If there's managers and systems beyond your control, there's at a certain point, there's really not much you're going to be able to do about it.
Yeah, and Gil, I think we're struggling against also not getting the full visibility to people and all of their expressions and body language. And, you know, if you're sitting face to face across the table with someone, you get a read of them in a way that we can't now because we're sitting behind video screens. So what is some of your advice around, you know, how to get the most out of every conversation, even if it has to be through a video chat, in terms of leaders being present and supportive of their people?
My advice would actually be, don't always make it a video chat. Use the medium that makes the most sense for the conversation. Because that's one of the things, one of the mistakes that I believe was made by a lot of leaders when they went to a remote environment. They felt we should be, you know, FaceTime, FaceTime, FaceTime. And to Ebony's point about, you know, clarity of who to trust, there were a lot of people who were saying, you know, you should be calling your people constantly, constant Zoom calls. Well, that wasn't necessarily what was going to make people comfortable or productive, because there's a lot of people who are uncomfortable and unproductive on a Zoom call. Sometimes record a video, sometimes text. And that's the way to really be the most present, is by being intentional about how you communicate. Because if everything gets thrown into the Zoom meeting or Teams meeting bucket, then we're all at the end of the day having 8 hours straight of meetings, having Zoom fatigue, which is stressful and can impact, you know, your sleep and a variety of other things. That's where it needs to change, I think.
Thanks, Gil.
You know, I think your point about the video is important. On a macro level, if we look at the rise of Clubhouse, which is an audio direct chat platform, that we'll see that that was one of the reasons why Clubhouse was able to take off. You don't have to worry about what the background looks like, that people don't know that you're a hoarder or you have 50 cats in your house, or that your kids are banshees and they run around in diapers. And so,
or whether you are actually a cat.
Exactly. And so, yeah, all of those things are not important on Clubhouse. You can just listen and then bring yourself up on stage when you want to talk. Otherwise, you can consume at your own convenience. And that's an app that rose during the pandemic that's now worth $1 billion. I'm like, I don't know how they come up with these evaluations, but understanding that the rise of Clubhouse and people just wanting to feel a direct connection without the pressure of the video, I think is also part of it. So I liked what you said about video may not be the answer.
It's not, but we jumped to that because that's what we believed, because our paradigm was face to face. That's how we communicate. I work, and I've shown Bev this, I work in an app called Verbella, which is a virtual reality environment. And one of the things that I found really interesting is I was getting a lesson from a university professor from UC Santa Cruz who's been teaching there for 2 years now. So well before the pandemic even started. And what she was saying is that as you get used to it, you actually are able to pick up a lot of things over conversation, audio, that you wouldn't necessarily pick up over video. I mean, we survived on conference calls for years. We can't just throw that away. I mean, I like video for certain purposes, but for other purposes, you know, you feel like you're on stage the whole time, you're on camera the whole time, and that can be stressful. So I like the variety of ways of communicating.
My senior leaders prefer audio only, and this is like for the past 5 to 6 years. Like, we'll do a coaching session. I'm like, do you want to? No, I don't want to get on camera. And so, like, literally, it's always been a call. They never wanted to, even before the pandemic. It was a straight audio relationship unless we were actually seeing each other in person. And so I think there's something to be said about the rise of audio.
And then that also means that you're definitely dressing for yourself. You're not dressing for them. Because if you're dressing nicely, you know it's not for, if it's always phone calls, then it's just for you.
It really is just for me. I mean, otherwise, I'll have to purge these clothes because I haven't worn them in 1 year. And like that.
And they don't bring you joy, correct?
Correct. That means they have joy. But now that I wear them on a regular basis, they're bringing me joy and they get the right to stay. This is really just all about me not too much weight and having to get rid of stuff.
Before we move on to the last little bit here where we're going to talk about looking forward, I just wanted to go to Eva quickly and just see if you had some thoughts to throw in here to this part of the conversation.
Oh man, I think I had in the background, I had some thoughts in regards to what Ebony had said about, you know, all of these changes and the different things that have arisen just in the past year that everybody is so fumed about, or they feel so passionately about. And those things have reared their head in the workplace. And we actually just had a situation with 2 of our employees. One, you know, is older generation, one is younger generation, and they could not get past their differences. So we brought them into the office and said, you know, they couldn't even look at each other. That's how you could cut the tension with a knife. And we looked at them and said, you know, y'all have commonalities here. Both of you do not want to be in this office right now. And we picked it apart for them. We said, let's hear about your background. And, you know, some of these things might not be comfortable for you to go through, but let's get to the depth of it. Let's find out who you really are, because the 2 of you don't know where you came from. And when we started picking at it and tearing apart the pieces and the layers, they finally looked at each other and they said, I had no idea. I didn't know that that's where you came from. And I didn't know that you had that scenario or a trigger or anything else like that. And they said, you know, I felt so much tension being around you and felt like I was going to get in trouble with HR if I said anything to you. And they both just came to a breaking point. And it was like by the end of the meeting, they hugged out. They gave each other a hug and really understood it. And I was just blown away that just picking apart their own backgrounds, they got to that part where there's no difference in the 2 of us. We have very slightly different angles of things, but at the lead-in of it, it's pretty much the same. So I like what Ebony said, because it makes perfect sense. And all of these things that are bubbling up, if we can just have those honest conversations and not make it uncomfortable, then we can come to a position where it's a lot more comfortable for everyone.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point there, and it sets us up for a nice conclusion to our conversation today around just bringing the humility into everything that we're doing as leaders, and knowing that everyone is struggling in different ways. But to Ebony's point, and to the point you just made with your example, Eva, there's more commonality there than there is difference. So for leaders, if you're just going to do one thing, look to see if you can mediate by finding common ground for people and with yourself as well. So we started the conversation, we were talking about how we were feeling today about leadership. We then have had a look back and looked at some of the shifts that have happened. We've talked about the challenges that we've been experiencing, but what does that mean for us going forward? So Ebony and Gil, if I could call on you to each give us your one thing that we should be thinking about to really have an impact as leaders moving out of this conversation and back into our days today, that will really impact our people and the wider organization. What would your one recommendation be that all of us think about? So Ebony, I'll pop to you first.
Okay, I would say every day we're all looking at news and getting information. We should start collecting something called signals. It's from the signals that we collect, because that's the first symptom that we get of a disease that's coming organizationally, societally. If you're collecting those signals and reviewing them on a regular basis, then you'll begin to predict where the drivers will come from for change. And so it's things as small as, DJ D Nice playing on Instagram in early March to now Instagram changed their algorithm from being able to do an Instagram live for 59 minutes to now you can stay on for 13 hours straight, which then leads to the fact that on Alibaba and their platform Taobao, people are live streaming for 18 hours in Asia now. That's the signal. That's a signal. And so as a tech company that's maybe servicing customers, are you prepared for that? And is your product manager, do they have that in their purview? Right? So there's signals that are being shown to us every day. William Gibson said the future's already here, just unevenly distributed. Part of your job, if you're in leadership and doing strategy, is looking at the signals, cataloging them, and then bringing that into conversations for innovation. And so that's one of the skills people should bring in every day. Every day, you as a human observer see something. It means something to you, you just don't know what yet. But if you went to go have that discussion with somebody else who had a different viewpoint, maybe that was polarized, you could come up with an innovative strategy for your company. And so collecting signals is my one thing I would say leaders should add in.
Awesome. Thanks, Ebony. Gil, what are you thinking about?
What I'm thinking about is about reframing the role and the purpose of organization, because historically the purpose of organization was around making money, making capital. Eventually it was also about serving customer needs. But the reality is that misses the human impact, that every day the employees are far more impacted than the customers. And our lives are impacted by that. I keep on thinking, I saw a cartoon, I forget, within the last week, of a person looking under a spotlight. It's all dark around it, but looking under a lamp post. And the person comes up and says, "What are you looking for?" He says, "I'm looking for a ring." He says, "Why are you looking there? Didn't you lose the ring over in the field?" He's like, "Yeah, but this is where the light is." And so that's what I believe we've been doing for years, is we've been shining a light on the capitalist existence for organizations, but we haven't shone a light on the fact that organizations also impact human beings in a wide variety of ways and impact employees every single day in a lot more profound way than we impact our customers.
Fabulous. Well, those are two really good points to take with us and think about. Thank you both, Ebony and Gil, and everyone who contributed and spent this hour with us today. I know that I spend a lot of time thinking about leadership, but I always find it so rejuvenating to get other points of view and to just hear from others who are also thinking about this in different ways. So please connect with each other. I did share Gil and Ebony's contacts in the chat. Feel free to grab that. Reach out to me if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn. And please keep the conversation going. And if you liked the experience you had here today, please consider coming back on March 11th. We are going to have another conversation similar to this one. We're going to be looking at remote and hybrid workplaces and what leadership do we need to make those workplaces and people thrive. So love to see you back here. We will share the recording of this event via a blog post afterwards that Vincent from our team will be sharing with all of you. And if you've got any feedback and what could we have done better, I'd also love to hear that. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next time, and I'll play us out with some Queen. And you know, maybe if you've got a song request for the Conversations at Work playlist, I'm always happy to receive those requests. So thanks everyone. Take care.